on Friday, we had gotten to the stage where we were looking at the issues of osmoregulation. So remember, osmoregulation is a new term, right? So we can kind of split this in half. This is the way of looking at controlling, right, our saltwater balance. And this is, as you remember from Friday, one of the main ways that we see in particular vertebrates dealing with their saltwater balance, right? The other option, remember, was osmoconformer, but that was much less common. Remember, we said particularly as we consider things like freshwater organisms, right? We thought, well, when we think about things like the heart or things like the muscle, right, those need to have some kind of ion concentration, right? Calcium makes the heart pump, right? Sodium makes your muscles flex, right? So we usually need to have some kind of salt in our body. So most organisms want to control what that is. And so how is it we go about doing that? So at the end of class, we got about halfway through this slide when we were talking about it. And so we said, well, what are the ways we can be really effective in making sure that we can control what's inside our body versus whatever kind of space around us is? Okay? So we'd only talk about the first two of these bullets, really. Okay, the first of which, hate coming from outside in, it always gives you like that inside the mask kind of runny nose, and it's the worst, is this idea of having some kind of impermeability, okay? So as we thought about before, right, of being that kind of leaky bag, right, having scales helps prevent exchange within that bag. So here's my little organism, right, of whatever. Whatever my content is. Okay, and maybe I'm sitting in fresh water. Okay, if I have a heavy, let's pick something to represent scales here. Or a doily, whatever. Your imagination, let that run wild. Okay, so if I've got some kind of scales, which in this case are a bit like armor plating, right, and that feels very visceral to us. We got to deal with these in class last week. So what this allows for us is to sort of prevent that free exchange. Okay, remember we said, okay, if I'm really salty inside, the water wants to go inside to dilute that. We don't want that to happen. So here's the blue representing my water. The scales are going to help prevent that random influx, right, of osmosis. In, and it'll help prevent, right, here are all my solutes, high concentration of solutes inside my body, right? Naturally wanting to go towards equilibrium, right? Equal amounts of salts on both sides. That's our rules of diffusion. Okay, so I'm very crowded in here. My salts would want to leave my body. We don't want them to leave our body. We need those salts. Okay, so having scales is a barrier to help prevent my salts from leaving. So that impermeability, that unpassability, right, okay, is basically saying I'm going to help prevent equilibrium from happening. Man. I'm going to remove our definitions. We have a little more space here. Okay. The other thing we talked about were chloride cells. Okay. So these are a specific type of cells that we found in the gills. Was that my computer making that noise? Oh, didn't mean to click that. Rude thing. Okay, looks like it's still working. I'm just generally nervous. All right. So these are specialized type of cells in the gills, okay, which are going to help pump salts in the direction that we need them. Okay, so remember, chloride is half of a common salt. So if we think about what's table salt, right, that's sodium chloride, NaCl, right? So there's the chloride. This is why chloride is important. This is half of a salt ion. So this is where our gills are focused. So if I'm a fish, happy fish, okay, and I'm living in fresh water, okay, is my body more saline or less saline than the area around me? More saline, right? Okay, so do I need to keep salt or get rid of salt? I need to keep salt, right? It's definitely an N. Let's try that again. Okay, so we're talking about actively pumping, right? This is something that as I am breathing in water, okay, and then I'm pushing that water over my gills, right? That's how we breathe. Okay, this fish is going to be actively pumping chloride in. I want to make sure that I'm not losing salt through that process. Right? I need to keep salt in my body. I don't want that to be going out. Right? Where normally, right, via the laws of diffusion and equilibrium, it would want to go. Conversely, right, if we think about this the opposite way, if I'm a saltwater fish, okay, does my body have more or less salt than the space around me? Less, right? The ocean's super, super salty, right? Salt you can taste, okay? So, if I have less salt than the space around me, okay, do I need to keep salt in my body or make sure I'm continuously excreting salt? I need to excrete salt. Good. All right, so in this case, if we're a saltwater fish, every time we breathe in, right, we're going to get a mouthful of really salty water. Okay? And so we need to make sure that we don't end up keeping a whole bunch of salt with every breath, right? So when we push that over our gills, it's really good. You guys can't see my facial expressions when I'm doing that. Right? We need to make sure that a lot of salt is going out with those breaths, right? We don't want to end up with a bunch of salt kept in. We can kind of imagine, right, when you get a lot of salt in a drink or salt in a food and that kind of evaporates off, you get that salt crystallization around stuff. Everybody's seen that when there's too much salt in things? So that's what we want to prevent from happening. So this would be pushing those chloride things out. Right? We want to keep it out of our body. Okay? We need some salt. Okay, we don't want so much, right? We become hypertensive.
Is that like the same, it's like, what, obviously like one's like breathing, but like random ventilation, like is it like the same kind of like going into the mouth and like pushing out?
Yes, so the question is this happening via the same process as they're breathing? So this is occurring at the same time, right? So these are just special cells that while they're breathing are saying, are we keeping the salt? Are we ditching the salt? Okay, what does our fishy friend need? Okay, any questions about chloride cells? Okay, so let's look at these other two then. Okay, so then we're looking at scales are preventing exchange from happening, so it's basically preventing loss, right? Chloride cells are happening during respiration, right? How can we keep us in balance? Drinking and eating, right, kind of coming together. So this is basically asking if we need more, okay, or when, right? We can't stay in perfect balance all the time. So when I'm thirsty, right, and I need more water, right? Or we've all kind of had that feeling, right, kind of craving a little bit of salt, okay? So we eat a little bit of food in us, okay? Drinking is one of the major ways our fishy friends are getting it, right? So for them, literally, all they do is open their mouths, right? And they can swallow water. Okay, so in that case, they're getting fresh water, so they can reduce the salt content in their body. Or if they're living in a very salty area, right, they can get salt right from the water, or just like we do, right, from their foods. Okay, so this one can be quite intuitive since it functions very similar to the way that we increase our salt and water intake, or content in our bodies. You know, the counterbalance of that is once you put it in your body, got to come back out, right? So we need to excrete it, okay? And generally in this case, we're talking about pee, right, which is the main way that we're getting rid of water and salt, right, in a balanced way. And again, so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, right? Urine is specifically formatted to make sure that it's checking in with the body and getting rid of water or salt in whatever amount that we want, right? So when we have too much water, right, you have very clear pee. And when you have too much salt, you have very yellow pee. And hopefully those are the only colors you get. Okay, so we're going to look at urine here in a little bit more detail in a hot second. But very generally, these concepts make sense as we think about, well, how can we have some control over what's going into and coming out of our bodies as far as water and salt go. Remember, that's our overarching goal here, right? Osmoregulation, control. So how many techniques can we have to have that control? Feel good? All right, let's talk about pee then. surprisingly big deal. So we're talking about pee, right? We're talking about excretion. So this is actually a really important process, right? And more so than just making sure we are getting rid of, okay, the right amount of water and salt, which in and of itself, right, is super important. Okay, so this does a lot of stuff. So as you might imagine, this is getting rid of salt and water, but it's getting rid of other wastes as well. Okay, in particular, we're getting rid of some carbon dioxide, okay? But importantly, we're getting rid of nitrogenous waste. And this is one of the main routes out of your body that in addition to salt, we're also going to get rid of nitrogenous waste. Okay? So a lot of nitrogen in your body, okay? Think about like amino acid breakdown, protein breakdown, nucleic acid breakdown. Okay, a lot of the nitrogen from those compounds are not going to go the route of fecal matter, right? That's going to go the route of your kidneys and ultimately your urine. Okay, because these compounds are very, very toxic, right? Nitrogenous waste are toxic or poisonous depending on how they're going through your body. So they need a very specific route so your body can put them in a form, right, that is not going to poison you, both as they're being processed and then ideally as they're being released. Right? So that's one of the major jobs that your kidneys, or whatever kind of organism you are, the form of kidneys that you have, are performing, right, is wrapping your nitrogen up into a nice package that it's not murdery. Okay. So there are 3 different forms or packages that we wrap nitrogen into, and that's the actual form that your pee comes out as, right? And then we mix that with water and salt as it exits the body. Okay. So we get ammonia, which I know sounds surprising. This is largely what we see aquatic organisms use. Okay, we have urea, which is what we have, and uric acid. So we'll talk about in a bit why there are these 3 different kinds and what the benefits and disadvantages of each are. Okay, now, a couple of reminders when we're talking about excretion. This is not talking about undigested food, right? That's an entirely separate pathway. And the goal here, remember, is to maintain some kind of homeostasis. Remember, homeostasis is overall balance. Okay, and this has several balances here that we're looking at, right? We're talking about salt-water balance. We're talking about nitrogen balance. Okay, so your kidneys are doing a really big job. And since we're terrestrial organisms, they're doing a really, really big job. But we'll get to that much later. Okay, this feel okay? Everybody see the overarching goal that our big-time kidneys are doing? Okay, so let's focus a little bit more then on these nitrogen compounds. All right, we'll call them the big N, because this is going to help us break, scroll for me, our P's, right, our excretion types into our 3 different groups. Okay, so remember I said we're talking about nitrogen. Basically, one of the main places we're seeing this nitrogen coming from is from amino acids or from proteins, right? Remember that nitrogen in most forms is very toxic, right? At least when it's first broken down. So our goal here, or at least the kidney's goal, right, is to put this into a form that is not going to be harmful to your body as it's passing through you, and ultimately isn't going to be harmful to you when it's first released, right? We don't want to be coping with that. Right, so this is why we have these different types, right? Is where you live ultimately, so where you're going to release this stuff okay, is really going to limit the form that it can be in. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of benefits and disadvantages to each type. Okay, so first let's look at ammonia, because this feels like a weird thing to be peeing out, right? To us, ammonia is super crazy toxic. Right? We use this to clean things. The smell alone makes your eyes burn. Okay, so ammonia, nitrogenous-based compound. Okay, this is what we see a lot of our aquatic organisms use. Now, be careful. We'll see as an example, this isn't exclusive. Okay, but right, default, the vast majority. Right, so if you're thinking of a fish, right, most of our fishes are using this. Right, so trouts, guppies, whatever you're picturing on a coral reef. Right, those all are going to pee ammonia. Okay. So we're always going to see some kind of trade-off here. So the benefit to making ammonia is, of all three of the P types, this is the cheapest to make. And of course, when we're talking about bodies, when we're talking about things being cheap, and we're talking about energetically inexpensive, right? It takes the least amount of ATP, the least amount of energetic investments to make this. Remember, everything in your body is a cost-benefit analysis. If I'm spending less currency, right, less energy or ATP making this, right, then I have surplus money, right, surplus ATP that I can now invest doing something else. Maybe it's growing, maybe it's making eggs, maybe it's getting away from a predator, whatever, okay? But I have that currency, right? I have a savings account, okay? So this is a benefit. Cheap. Cheap is good. We like cheap. Now, there's a reason not everybody makes ammonia, okay? If we peed ammonia, everything would be awful. We would probably die of fumes. Because this stuff is crazy toxic and this is intuitive to us. Okay, now, why is it then that if a fish is peeing ammonia, that they aren't dying from horrifically toxic ammonia fumes? Because they're in water. So what's happening to the ammonia? Why is it so fast? Yes, right? So the ammonia is getting peed directly into a large body of water, or at least some body of water, right? So it's immediately getting diluted as it's being peed, right? So even though this is highly toxic, because it's aquatic, right, the pee gets diluted. So unless you have your fish shoved in a little fish tank and you're not doing a great job of cleaning your fish tank, in which case you can, in fact, kill your fish via ammonia toxicity, right, then it doesn't matter too much.
So this is the top, says all organisms
So all organisms will produce some kind of pee.
okay.
So in this case, right, all organisms are producing AP, right? And so in this case, we're talking about ammonia. And we're going to flip through to the next one here.
So not all organisms produce ammonia?
Not all organisms produce ammonia per se. In this case, most aquatic organisms do.
Okay.
Okay, our first track makes sense? Any questions about ammonia? Okay, so we're going to keep adding tracks to this as we go, right? So ammonia is the only one we care about right now because we're in the water. Okay? As we come out of the water then, so we're going to revisit, and I'll keep bringing up this exact image. Because we leave the water, then we're going to gain different types of ways to pee. Because we'll have different types of environments to worry about. Okay? But right now, all we have is ammonia. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this. And I don't care if you work together or not. I know there aren't even that many of us in here today. But what I want to do is practice with our osmoregulation techniques. And this will be a really good practice. So picking either a freshwater or a saltwater fish, what I want you to do is think about our issues with osmoregulation, right? So if I were to start with, like if I chose fresh water, right? So draw me a fish, right? And draw me the scenarios that we started with on Friday, right? So what is some general environment? Salt concentration. What is the fish's salt concentration? Okay, right, you don't need perfect. I've just been using like 0 and 1,000, right? That's fine. So who has a higher salt concentration, the fish or the environment, right? And then tell me what normally wants to happen, right? Which way does the salt want to go? Which way does the water want to go? And what would that do to the poor fish? Right? Okay. And then without looking at our notes, right, what are at least one way that keeps our fish from dying whatever horrific way that we've just come up with?
This might sound really tough, but is it like as we okay, because we have got like endosynthesis and exosynthesis, is it like as severe as like the salt and water like rushing in and like exploding? Is that yeah, okay. I didn't know if the fish would explode from that.
Very dramatic end of life, but that's sort of what we're talking about, yeah. Whew. Let's set one up together just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm going to set up my saltwater fish up here because I feel like I always pick freshwater. So if I've got a very sad saltwater fish, right, because we know we're going to punish this poor little guy for no reason, is my saltwater fish going to be saltier on the inside, or is the environment going to be saltier? The environment's going to be saltier, right? So let's set my environment at 1,000. Okay, I don't even care what the units are. I'm just really kind of focused on numbers, right? Outside, I'm going to set it at 1,000. Inside of my fish, probably not going to be 0, right? We're going to set it arbitrarily low. Okay, whatever unit or numbers you picked are irrelevant, right? In this case, I just want my outside to be high and my inside of my fish to be low, right? To reflect that the ocean is much saltier than my fish is. Everybody understand that? Right? If I'd done freshwater, right, this should be the inverse, right? My freshwater should be low, right, very near 0, and my fish should be something just higher than that. Okay. Just throw myself some quick visuals. Okay, which direction do the salts want to go? Into the fish, right? We want to go towards equilibrium. I have too much crowdedness outside. Okay, seemingly more space inside the fish. Right, so my solutes want to go inside. What direction does the water want to flow? Where is there more salt? Outside, right? And so water always wants to dilute the most salt. So water is going to go towards the highest concentration of salt. Okay? If all the salt rushes into my fish and all the water rushes out of my fish, what's going to happen to my poor fish? What happens if all the water leaves your body? Guys sort of shrink and evaporate. I look like a little fishy mummy.
I didn't know what words to make.
Maybe it implodes, right? Maybe we'll just stick with very sad, very dead fish. Maybe we cured the fish. It's going to look like cured meats. And we've added some salt, right? Some tasty fish. Totally forgot to bring up my Socrates. I'm kind of doing that in the background in case you guys are wondering why I'm playing on my phone. Okay, so this would be a very sad dead fish. Also maybe delicious. Okay, but bad day for a little fish. So what could we do to protect our little fish? Scales. That's A. Yeah, let's put my doily wrap back on here. So we can put scales on. What else might I do? Oh, that drawing's looking really horrendous. Chloride cells, good. If I were to put chloride cells on, okay, I meant to put that in a different color. Don't be rude. Yellow it is. Stop. Are my chloride cells going to absorb salt or excrete salt? Excrete. Right? Because we've said we have to worry about salt coming into the fish, and we don't want that, right? So our chloride cells are going to help protect this by making sure we're pushing out excess salt. Good.
So is it like pushed out through like the respiration, or how does like the chloride?
Yeah, so during during respiration, right, these cells in the gills, right, would be pulling salt from the water that's going over the gills and making sure that's not going into the body. Okay, what about my pee as a fish? Am I going to have really clear liquidy pee, right, or really dark yellow salty pee? Okay, do I want to be getting rid of water or getting rid of salt in my pee? I want to get rid of salt, right? So that's salty pee. Salty ammonia-based pee. So we've only worked, of course, through our saltwater one. This is a really good practice, okay, where we kind of have to put all those pieces together. Okay, does everybody see what we did here? Does this make sense how we worked through this? Any questions? Cody.
For the fresh water, it wouldn't be right.
So it's still going to pee. Okay, so if we were to do the fresh water, okay, what kind of pee would our freshwater fish have? It's going to pee clear. Yes, excellent, right? So it's going to keep as much of that salt in its body and excrete out the extra water that it has. Very good. Okay, so one way we want to look at this is and that's kind of why drawing this in advance helps, is we want to look at the fish and say, what does the fish need to keep from dying? Okay, and then we can use our protective services to fulfill those needs, right? I have to worry about salts coming in. Okay, so we're going to use all of these protective services to make sure that we're pushing those salts back out, right? Any other questions about our imploding and exploding fishes? And there are some good examples of this at the back if you get stuck. But really try to work through these without peeking.